Hi, in today's video, this is part of my ongoing series of how to clean the controls on NuTone Intercom remote stations. And today's subject is a NuTone Model 2027 Inside Remote speaker. 2027s were used on all NuTone solid-state 3-wire intercom systems from about 1964 through the end of 1973. So they were widely used, and although the styling of the grille and the color selections changed over those years, fundamentally they're all the same type of station. It's a fairly simple type of station. You have a volume control with a knob, and you have a single intercom button, which is simply push to talk. It's a very simple. Older 3-wire systems had very simple control circuits, and they work very much like walkie-talkies. Occasionally on some of the later ones, on the intercom button, it'll say push up to lock, and on those stations, if you push the button in and push it up slightly, it'll lock into the pushed in position, and that gave those systems sort of a monitor feature. If you put the baby's room, if you put it on talk lock, that station will pick up sounds in the baby's room all the time, and when the baby wakes up and cries, you'll hear it. So let's turn it around and see what's on the back. There really isn't very much on the back. You have a 5-inch diameter speaker cone. These systems use 3.2 ohm speakers, which are different than later models. You have a volume control. You have a very rudimentary style intercom switch here. Some of the connections between the volume control and the speakers are direct through these wires. And when it comes to terminating these stations, let's turn it around, it's done a little differently, and it's labeled a little differently than later models. So let me show you what that's about. So, oh, and by the way, this speaker is from 1969, March. So on the back of the plastic grill, molded into the plastic, is actually the color coding of where the 3 wires from the master station attach. It's marked here as copper with an arrow pointing down to this screw, silver with an arrow pointing down to this screw, and way down here, molded into the plastic, it says center with an arrow going off at a diagonal. And sometimes this causes confusion because people aren't really sure what it's pointing to, and what it's actually pointing to is this screw on the speaker terminal strip itself. So the copper wire goes here, the silver wire goes there, and the center wire goes here. So what is the copper, silver, and center thing about? I'll show you that right now. So in the early days of NuTone intercom systems, all systems were 3-wire systems, and this is a piece of NuTone 3-conductor intercom wire. In the later days it was referred to as IW3 for intercom wire 3-conductor. But in the early days there wasn't any color coding on the insulating jacket of the cable. It was just gray cable. So how did you know when you went to terminate or to hook up your speakers? You have to be consistent wire for wire at each end of every cable. So how did you do that without any color coding on the jacket? Well, under the insulation, the actual metal wire was different colors. What would be later referred to as the red wire would have a silver coated conductor wire under the insulation, and the other edge, which later became the blue wire, the wire was copper. And of course, since this is a flat parallel cable, the wire in the center is always in the center. And that's how originally things were labeled as copper, silver, and center, which align with the labeling on early speakers. So that's what that's all about. Now let's get back to our station. So to disassemble the switch, the first thing you do is remove the screws that are holding the wire in place, and also the contacts, and then you can lift the contacts off the back of the grill. And if you notice, the contacts are both the same shape. So they use one form for both parts of the switch, which makes it easier when you go to reassemble it, because regardless of which one goes where, as long as you put them back in the right way, you won't have a problem. So once you take these out, all that's left is the springy metal rod. And then the question is, how do we take that out? So to remove the springy metal rod, it's necessary to remove the volume control from the speaker grill itself. So the way you do that is you turn it back over, and let's turn it right side up. And first you pull the knob off, and then down underneath the knob is a nut that's threaded onto the body of the volume control, and that's what holds it onto the grill. So we have to loosen the nut, and it's easiest to do that with a pair of needle nose pliers. You won't be able to get a socket or something like that down inside. There isn't really enough clearance. And once you get it loosened a little bit, sometimes you can turn it with a screwdriver. It's a little awkward to do when you're standing off to the side. Okay, so the nut comes off. Now the volume control is loose, so we'll hold it in place, turn it back around, and to remove the volume control, push the intercom button up slightly, raise the volume control up, and slide the rod out of the hole that's in the button. And also now the button comes loose. Now, the volume control is still connected to the speaker terminals with these two wires. You don't want to disconnect or damage those. You simply want to be careful when you're manipulating the volume control. If we turn this over, you can see how the springy metal wire is here. It loops around the body of the volume control, and it's actually soldered onto one of the volume control terminals right here. So this has to remain as an assembly. Do not take this apart. It'll just cause a lot of problems. As a note, one of the problems with 2027 speakers has to do with the plastic on the faceplate in this recessed area where the volume control is mounted. It's not uncommon that the plastic inside the recess will crack all the way around, and the volume control won't actually be attached to the rest of the grill. It'll be kind of floating in there. When that happens, you get intermittent operation of that station because it's having the volume control bolted to the face of the speaker that holds the springy wire in place so it makes good contact. So if you have a broken grill, you'll have to source a used grill to replace it with. So let's take a look at the problems that happen with these switches. As an example, I have some contacts that I removed from another model 2027 speaker and cleaned prior to starting this video. So here are the original contacts that you saw me take out of the first speaker, and these are the ones that I've cleaned. So you can see how this is all dark and oxidized, and here we have the cleaned contacts. All the oxidation has been removed. They're shiny again. I don't know whether they're stainless steel or whether they're just coated metal, but all the oxidation has been cleaned away. And the way I did this was I soaked the contacts in a little tray of Navel Jelly for about 45 minutes, and that loosened and softened most of the oxidation that was on the surface of the contacts. And then I used a bristle brush and scrubbed the remaining bits off. In some of the more stubborn areas, I used a small brass brush to get the rest of it off, and now we have nice clean contacts. I also did the same thing to the springy metal rod. This is on a second speaker, and since the volume control is still attached to the speaker and it's really not very convenient to try to immerse this in the Navel Jelly. All I did was I took a paper towel, I put a little Navel Jelly on the paper towel and wrapped it around the metal rod to coat it and left it that way for a little while, and then I used a blue Scotch-Brite pad to clean up the surface, and now this is nice and shiny also. So the last step is to reassemble the switch so the speaker will work as it was intended. Reassembling the switch is fairly straightforward. You begin by putting the volume control with the springy rod in place slightly, reinserting the intercom button. You have to put the springy metal rod through the hole in the button, which is right there. So if you insert the button through the grill, slide the metal rod through the hole, and put the volume control back in place. That's all there is to it. Now we'll go ahead and put the nut back on that holds the volume control to the grill. Getting it started can be a little tricky. Again, when you're standing off to the side, trying to stay out of the way of the camera, it can be a little tricky. Let's try it this way. Alright, so that's nice and tight. Our springy metal rod is in place, and it's springy once again. And now we're going to put the contacts back in place. So this one goes this way, and this one goes in place, and it goes under the springy metal rod. A good way to do this is to simply, oops, that's a dirty one. We want a clean one there. Let's put the clean one back in place. All right. A good way to keep track of which way these go is to take a picture of it with your camera phone, or draw yourself a little diagram with a side profile so that when it's time to reassemble it, you can remember how they go. The screws hold the contacts in place, and now this speaker has been reassembled, and in the at-rest position, the springy metal rod is touching the contact for the silver wire, and when you press the button, the rod moves up, and it makes contact with the contact for the copper wire, and the intercom will work. So now the intercom connections have been cleaned. One last thing I like to do on these is to try to give these metal surfaces a little bit of protection. And the way to do that is to use something like, this is DeOxit fader grease. This is good, a general purpose, what would be considered a dielectric jelly, something that you can find commonly, because you're not going to buy a big tub of it like this, is if you go down to your local auto parts store, ask them for a little tube of silicone grease for spark plugs wires, and that's a dielectric jelly also, and that will work fine. All we're going to do is take a cotton swab and put a little bit of this on here, and maybe that's a little too much, and we're simply going to put it on the surface of the metal contacts. We're just going to slip the cotton swab down inside. You don't need a lot. Mostly what this does, it improves the connection that it makes. It helps coat the surface so it doesn't tend to oxidize. You can also coat them before you put them back in if you want to do it that way, and that's fine also. So now that we've cleaned our switch thoroughly, the last thing to do is to clean our volume control. And that's very much like all other NuTone volume controls. What you're going to do is take your DeOxit D5 and find openings in the control. For instance, in this particular one, in the body of the volume control, there's this little notch right here, and there's actually a little hole right in the notch. And if we spray a little bit in the hole, it doesn't take a lot, it only takes a little, and it's easier to rotate it if you put the knob back on. And we're going to rotate it back and forth. So this one starts off, it was fairly stiff, just like you would expect from a speaker that made in 1969. And that's already better, so we'll spray a little more. And you can feel as you rotate it, it becomes freer and freer. We'll try a little bit here. This is not so much of an exact science as it is you keep working at it a little bit. Now we have a lot of improvement. But I think I want a little more to get inside. So let's see if we can open up this little hole. It seems like it's got some little bit of gunk built up in it. Now you can feel the real difference. One of the things that's beneficial to observe while you're doing this is if you have your system, your intercom system on and you're playing music through it, you're listening to the radio, as you go around and clean the controls and clean the volume controls, you can hear how much improvement you're getting by the cleaning that you're doing. If you start off with a volume control that as you rotate it, it's very staticky and there are spots where the music cuts out and goes away altogether, if you clean the volume control while it's playing and you rotate it back and forth and you spray a little bit of cleaner in it and you keep working at it, you'll hear the improvement in the sound. And when you feel the control free up a great deal and all of a sudden the static and the dead spots are gone, you know you've done your job. So that's really all there is to cleaning the controls of a NuTone 2027 speaker. I hope you found this video to be helpful and interesting, and I hope it helps you with your 2027 speakers. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up on YouTube. If you find our other videos to be helpful, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's all for today. See you on the next video.